Hi, my name is Brianna Motzkus. I'm with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and today we're making crackers. All right, let's talk about inspiration real fast. So the inspiration for the quilt was definitely the panel. The pattern is always a plus, but this Wild Dusk panel from Hoffman Fabrics is super beautiful. So you've got 12 focus little picture blocks. This is a very large panel. You really could, if you just love this panel, I've got it linked in the description below, or check out your local quilt shop. You can easily just put a tulle border on it, get it quilted, send it, snuggle on it, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to show you how to make crackers out of a focus fabric. So what you need, if you liked the quilt, let's make it together. And what you're going to need is, of course, the pattern. It is crackers. You can get it in a printed form or PDF if you're someone who likes an electronic pattern. You're also going to need your coordinating pieces to go along with your panel. You can do some half-yard cuts. We do have kits available that have the pattern, the panel, a 3-yard cut of background, and 8 half-yard coordinating cuts. If you are someone who is not thrilled about cutting your own 2.5-inch strips, you can also get just your pre-cut strips. Whether you go with batiks and do Hoffman Bali Pops, there are 42 different 2.5-inch strips in here. This one's called Chai Tea. It's really pretty. I mean, it would equally be just as beautiful with these. It's going to have a little bit of extra tone, some in that sunset, some in the bird. Really pretty. And they're all going to be different textures, so it's going to give you that variety without having to buy a whole bunch of different half-yard cuts. You can also put anything, if you're someone who's maybe not a fan of batiks, you can put regular cotton fabric with this too. I am just a fan of batiks. I love the way they look, so I'm someone who's gonna probably go for batiks more so than just regulars. If you have a different focus fabric, a fabric that you love that you just can't cut up, get a jelly roll 2.5-inch strip set that goes with it. It doesn't have to be a panel. It can just be a really cool focus print. So, and then again, coordinating fabrics. The other thing you're probably going to want if you're cutting your own strips is a shape cut. A shape cut is a really nice tool for cutting strips. It has slashes every 1/2 inches to make cutting multiple strips really fast and accurate without having to move your ruler each time. Check out this video on our channel and it'll give you a more detailed tutorial on how to use a shape cut. It's definitely a game changer when you're cutting your own strips. So in your pattern, you'll notice that we are going to talk about how to make a stripped pieced half square log cabin block. And so I'm going to demonstrate that in case you are more of a visual learner. I will also quickly talk about how to fussy cut your panel block. If you're using a focus fabric, it's just going to be a fun little tidbit to, file away for a later date. But let's go ahead, let me get the sewing machine out. You're probably going to want to change your needle. If you haven't changed your needle in a while, that's always a good thing to do. One of the cheapest notions we have in quilting, and it's also something that will drastically change your experience in quilting. Whether it's going to be the accurate of your stitches, it's not going to pull your fabric, and it's just going to make the process a whole lot easier. So go ahead, get your sewing machine set up, wind a few bobbins, and if you are someone who's doing, again, a light background and a whole lot of color, pick a neutral color, like a light gray is a perfect thread color for these kinds of tones. Wind some bobbins, get your needle threaded, and also don't forget to change that needle. Okay, so I have went ahead and I cut up all of my fabric. I cut up all my background and I cut up all of my half-yard cuts. Now you might notice I have a few different background textures. In your kit, if you purchased a kit from us, you're just going to have one background piece, and that's totally okay. It's entirely up to you. I am just someone who likes the little bit of scrappy background, and so I just used up some different backgrounds I had. So I'm going to go ahead and start by separating my stacks and have a stack of background and a stack of color. All right, so I have separated some of these to get started. So in your pattern, there is a math cheat sheet, but keep in mind, if you are using your stash, if you're just gonna go through your stash, you've got strips at home, you've got fabric at home, keep in mind, 3 yards of background is roughly 42 2.5-inch strips. So you don't need a huge amount of background, but you really could cut up some of those little smaller pieces in your stash and know that I need 42 complete 2.5-inch strips, and that will yield me about 3 yards of background. So we're going to start doing our strip piecing half log, half and block. We're going to start by taking one background strip and one colored strip, and we're going to sew these together down the length of your strip. Right sides together, and again, we're quilting, so a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you are someone who doesn't have a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, just remember consistency is best. So make sure you are sewing your strips together and your blocks together on the same sewing machine if you're not certain it is a full accurate 1/4 inch strip. 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we're just going to sew this all the way down. All right, when you get to the end of your strip, go ahead and take it to your iron and go ahead and press to the dark. Okay, so once you have it pressed, we're going to cut these into 2.5-inch segments. It is going to be making this unit of your block. You can, if you are comfortable with your shape cut, use your shape cut. This is a perfect way to use your shape cut also. Otherwise, all we're going to do is we're going to line up one of our lines on that beautiful seam line we just pressed, and we're going to measure over 2.5 inches until they're all cut. Okay, so once you are done cutting that strip set up, you're going to have 17 pieces. What we're doing is this is going to be making, of course, this little unit right here. So now we are on to sew on our dark piece. And you'll see in your pattern, we go through light and dark, so you'll see what gets sewn on next to create that half log happen for you. So we're going to start with another colored piece. Again, something different than this bright blue. It can still be a blue, but just make sure it's different enough to give your block the variety. If you are using scraps, kind of like myself, I have something that's not a totally full strip. Don't worry about it. 17 of these guys are not going to fit on a full strip, so we're going to go through probably at least a strip and a half to sew all of these to our next color. So we're going to start, I always like to start by sewing my pieces with my dark on top. It just, as you're sewing all of your strips around and around, it just keeps you square. So whatever works best for you. In my head, this with dark on top works easiest. And I'll just always make sure I start with dark on top. I'm going to do right sides together onto my next color and sew them together. And we're going to do some chain piecing. So we're going to start by sewing all the way down. And then when we get to the end, I'm just going to do needle down, bring my presser foot up, take my next piece. Line it up. I'm not going to butt them up edge to edge. I am going to keep a little bit of a gap right there because we're going to, of course, cut these apart and then keep sewing. And grab another one. And we're going to do that until all 17 pieces are sewn to another color. Okay, and once you're done, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my nice pair of scissors. I'm going to cut these apart, just right in between. I'm not going to pick an end. I'm just going to cut them apart. It's going to make it easier to press. So you can see I couldn't get them all on the, You can see I couldn't get them all on the same color. So we're going to have 2 other colors. And just, again, cut right between that color. You can use your rotary cutter if you want to. And then we're going to go ahead and get to the ironing board and we're going to press to the dark, or in this case, into the yellow. With your leftover color, so I didn't use all of this one, just go ahead and put this back into your color pile. We're going to use this as we keep on going around in our log cabin block. So let's go press these and I'll be right back. Okay, so once we have the next pieces pressed and ready to go, we're going to go ahead and trim where our next seam is going to go. So we are going to be sewing right here next with a background piece. Again, we're just following the pictures on our pattern. So we've done this step, we're on to this step. So we're going to just trim this. The reason we're just going to square up that little edge is it's going to make sure that we stay straight when we are done with our 12.5-inch half log cabin, we are going to have a nice square block. We might have to trim it up just a little bit to trim up some of these little edges on this side, but we really want to make sure that we have a nice straight seam right here. And all we're going to do is we're going to line up a line along that seam we just made. And I know that a 2.5 inch square minus my 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to be 2 1/4. So I'm going to measure from here to 2 1/4 and keep a line on the seam I just made. And I'm just going to trim this off. This is just a little bit of a waste from when we were chain piecing all of those pieces. And then put that into another pile because that one's done, ready to sew. Take my next piece, line up. Again, I know this is going to be 2 1/4 and line up whatever line you want on that seam we just made and shave just a little bit of that off. We're going to do this to all of our pieces. And again, we're just trimming off where our next seam is going to take place. And we're only, you'll notice, only trimming that color piece, which makes sense because that's what we were just strip piecing. All right, we're going to trim all of these and then we'll be right back. Okay, again, not a whole lot of waste, just a little bit of snippets here and there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a background piece. And again, if they are smaller pieces, that's okay. We're going to use up all of those pieces as we continue to wrap around our half log cabin. So what we're going to do is our next unit is going to be right here. So what we're going to do, again, dark goes up. And we're going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch. And we're going to strip piece these the same exact way we've done the last 2 times. Again, we're going to go dark up. And we're going to sew all of these down and then press and be right back. Okay, so as you're cutting these apart, you might notice you have some, again, even smaller pieces of background. Save these. We know we're going to have to make more than 17 blocks to make our quilt, so we'll get back to those. Don't worry about that. We're going to cut all of our strips apart, and then we are going to press, again, towards the dark. So I am going to press towards the rest of my blocks right there. And same thing on this one. Press that way. So I'm going to cut these all apart and press, and then we'll be back to trim. All right, we're all pressed. Our next seam we're going to sew is actually right here along the dark. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We know that a 2.5 inch strip minus our 1/4 inch seam allowance is a 2 1/4 inch piece. So I'm going to have 2 1/4 line up against that seam. I'm going to have a line lined up against the seam I just made. And again, we're going to trim. And keep in mind, we're just trimming that background piece. So we're not trimming a whole bunch. Take the next one. Line up that 2 1/4 inch line. Line up that straight line. Again, this is just to make sure that we are making a nice square lock. I feel like this is kind of a key piece. If you are someone who has sewn for a lot of years and feel like, oh, I can make a straight line, no worries here. You can skip this part. I feel like I like this part because it really ensures that I'm doing a good job. And I don't have to worry so much. I can really just sew, press, trim, sew, press, trim. It's pretty mindless. But again, this is just a step that I like to do with my strip piecing. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to sew on another dark piece. We can use, again, this guy for some of them, but then I'm going to run into the risk of double doing. And for me, I don't like that. I feel like, yes, I like the idea of scrappy, but I don't want things. I have enough fabric. I can change it up. So I'll probably actually use this itty bitty strip and put that in there. So go ahead, sew on your next piece, same way. Again, dark is going to go up. right sides together, 1/4 inch seam, and then go ahead and keep strip piecing all the way down. Okay, so as you run out of room, so you can see that I really can't quite make this one fit. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and trim that piece off and still put it in to your dark pile. We will still probably use that small piece next time around when we're doing another set of 17 blocks. Because again, he's the perfect size for dark number 2. So go ahead and keep sewing these up. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to separate and press the dark. Okay, I've pressed to the dark. Our next seam we're going to make is right here. So we're going to head and trim up again. Just true up that straight line. Again, we're going to have 2 1/4 to that seam. And we're going to have a line beautifully marked on our ruler from this seam. And then we are going to trim that up. Just taking a little bit of that, again, piece out of the way. Same thing here. 2 1/4. Straight line. And I do want to show you on this one in particular. So we know that, let's just look at this block I've already done. So when our block is all done, pressed, we kind of square it up just a little bit, get off some excess. We know that nothing is going to be beyond this first square, even as we're strip piecing. So you'll notice on this one, I have quite a bit of it hanging over. So if we keep stitching from here down, it's just going to make it keep going longer and longer. And this is all going to be waste at the end. And you'll see as we get there, this little trick might make sense. I'm just going to trim this off a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy, but just trim that up a little bit so I'm not stitching so much of my good fabric into something that's going to be into the trash can anyways. I'm just going to true that up just a little bit. And that is something you can do or skip altogether. Again, as we get through the process of trimming up our blocks, that will make more sense once you see when we're all done. But go ahead and trim all of these, and then we'll sew our next piece on. Now that we are all squared up, we're going to go ahead and sew on another background piece. Again, I have a little piece left over. I could stitch that onto that one, but again, I don't like my prints touching. So I'm just going to shuffle my blocks just a little bit. I'm going to start with this guy. Right sides together, dark on top. And we're just going to, again, same thing. We're going to chain piece these all together all the way down. All right, and then even with this little piece left over, I might still hang on to him at least for a little bit. He is big enough to create a 2 1/2 inch square to remake these units. So I'm still going to hang on to him just in case. He may end up going in the scrap bucket or the donate scrap bucket later. But for right now, until I'm done with my project, he's staying in the light box. Again, we're just going to keep going all the way down, and then we're going to cut them apart and press to the dark. Okay, so we're just going to keep doing the same thing. We're going to sew on our piece, press, trim, sew on your next piece. So I'm going to keep going around. Again, your pattern's going to tell you how many rounds you need to do to make sure it fits to your focus piece. So I'm going to keep making mine, and then we'll be back together and I'll show you how to put it all together. Okay, so we've gotten all the blocks pieced. I've pressed them all really well. And you can see I started trimming and assembling and laying out all my blocks. So I ended up trimming everything to 12 1/2 inch blocks. So our half log cabin block is 12 1/2, and so is our focus block. Because remember, in your pattern, there is a math sheet. So I decided how big I wanted these first, and then followed the math sheet on how big these guys were gonna go. So the math sheet's really nice. If you are somebody who already has this pattern in your studio, you might not have the math sheet. So in the description below, I do have this math sheet linked. If you're someone who does a whole lot of log cabin quilting and have been looking for something, feel free to print this off. Also, you can email us, info@fabricpatch.net, and we can email it to you. So it's nice, but if you have a pattern that was printed prior to this video airing, you probably don't have this. So it'll essentially be your 5th page to your pattern. So let's talk real fast about how to trim up your half log cabin block. The other thing I want to point out to you, I did not notice until I started trimming, my blocks are made backwards from the pattern. If you look at the pattern, the light on the pattern is here and my light is up here. This is totally okay. In my head, having dark on top when I was sewing just made everything easy for me. What you need to know is, depending on if your block looks like mine or if your block looks like the pattern, make sure every single block is made in the exact same orientation. Otherwise, if you started your quilt at a retreat and some look like this, and then you got home and they look like this, you now have 2 beautiful quilts. So just keep that in mind. I made mine to the left and this one's made to the right. So I just wanted to let you know it does look different, but all of mine look like this. So they will create that crackers orientation. So I wanted to show you that because you probably all noticed, hey, wait a minute. So, all right. So I'm trimming all of my blocks to 12.5 inches. I happen to have a 12.5 inch square ruler. You can use a bigger one. I feel like when people ask me about what size of square ruler they should get, I usually always say at minimum you need a 12.5. But sometimes I'll say if you can find a 14 or a 16-inch square ruler, those are nice to have because you have a little more wiggle room on how big a block's. I would say me, for a quilter and how I quilt, I don't usually square up anything bigger than 12 inches. Because really the only thing I square up are log cabin blocks. Everything else is 4 patches and half square triangles, and they are what they are. You don't trim those up. So if you don't have one, I would say invest in a 12.5 inch one. What you need to be careful of is when you're trimming anything, whether you're going to use your 12.5 inch to trim up to a 10.5 inch, make sure you always know where that little 1/2 inch bit is. Because if we start trimming up on the other side, we're thinking we're doing 10.5 inches, but we're actually doing 11. So that's my only tidbit when you buy 1/2 inch rulers, is always make sure you know where that 1/2 inch side is. So when I'm trimming up, the most important thing for me is I always make sure I line up my first square. And a 2.5 inch square minus your 1/4 inch is, I'm going to line it up on that 2 1/4 right there. I also have a diagonal line that should hit at every little intersection as we go up, all the way to the end. The other thing that will help in making sure you line up your blocks every single time the same way, and also kind of remembering where that 1/2 piece is, which hopefully you've never experienced that. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But another cheat that we kind of use here at the quilt shop is we use a wet erase expo marker. What's really nice about the expo marker is, one, it's a wet erase, so it'll stay on until I wash my ruler, but I can mark certain things. So I'm going to mark that 2 1/4 because I feel like that's a very important one that I always want to start with. And then I always kind of mark my center right there. Again, 6 1/4 plus 6 1/4 is 12.5.
I'm going to mention from this side that from our viewpoint, it looks like that is on the opposite side.
Okay, the other thing you might notice is I am just using my mat to cut on. My block is just on it willy-nilly because I am using my ruler to square up my block, which I feel is 100% more accurate than trying to line it up on my ruler every time. And we've got, I don't know, how many blocks do we have to square up? A whole lot. I think like
69.
I don't know, a huge number. So we're going to have to get comfortable. So once I have it lined up, I'm going to go ahead and do my right side and my top. And then before I move my ruler, I always make sure I trim because it's a bear to, I mean, we know how to line it back up, but if you ever twist a little bit, things happen. So once I cut both sides, remove the little trim, I can then go ahead and flip this 180 degrees. And again, I can also flip my ruler the same way. If it's easier to keep your numbers the same way, you totally can, but I have my marks. So I can reline up my 2 1/4, I can reline up my center, and I am totally the same orientation. If you have a rotating mat, you could just flip it. I essentially have enough area, I could just flip my mat too. And I don't have a rotating mat, I just have 2 slick surfaces. So however that works best for you. All right, I'm gonna just make sure everybody's lined up. And then take my rotary cutter. And this part, I should not really trim a whole bunch off. I'm not thinking. And sure enough, there's dust and just a smidgen up here. So again, for every block, it's just a tiny bit of waste. If this worries you because you're not the straightest seam sewer, the straightest cutter, you can always leave more if you want to. Of course, when we are assembling our block, we always kind of kept these at bay so they weren't super long, so we didn't waste as much fabric. If you just let them kind of grow, you will have more wiggle room. So like I have another one up here that I can trim for you, which is this one. So you see how these overextend. So this is essentially my start point. These overextend. You can make sure everybody extends quite a bit more than I did. I'm just comfortable at cutting, piecing, squaring up that I know I don't need a whole bunch of room. But if you are, let those extend quite a bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. And also be sure that you press very well. I think making sure that all of your seams are pressed open, and so you don't have anything exposed, making sure they're nice and flat when they're pressed. Using your best press is a great way to keep everything nice and flat. If you are trimming before you're pressing, you're more likely to make mistakes and have mix-matched sized blocks. So I'll show you one more time how to trim this. So again, I have it marked at 2 1/4 and 6 1/4, so I can line up every block the same way. Also, if you find that a block looks a little funny, there's nothing wrong with going back to the iron and repressing. There's also nothing wrong with deciding, you know what, this is going to be an orphan block, I'm going to remake this block. It's all okay. There's nothing wrong. As long as you're happy at the end of the day is what's important. And again, little pieces. And again, the little pieces is because I kept those pretty neat as I was sewing. Line up my 2 1/4 down here. Make sure my diagonal line, 6 1/4. And again, there's nothing to trim on this guy. I think we're just gonna have hairs. Yeah, so mine come out pretty perfect every time. The arranging comes the fun part. So your hardest part will probably be finding a clean, pet-free spot. My case, I have a dog that little Miss Rowe thinks as soon as there's a block on the floor, she comes and lays on it. It's obnoxious. But then you start laying things out. When you follow your pattern, in your pattern here, there is kind of a blown up picture of how to put together your crackers. Now, there are other orientations that you can put these together. It's essentially a half log cabin, so you can twist a little bit, find out something different. But if you're making crackers for the design that's already shown, it'll tell you how to put it together. Mine is actually...
Yours is upside down. Yeah, yours is like...
Mine's this way. I went backwards every step of the way. So
That's okay.
So what you did, I mean, it doesn't matter where that little 2.5 inch square is. All I need to know is it needs to be background at the top corner and then dark. And then my focus piece. Dark, then light, light, then dark. You can kind of see how it makes this really big chevron that turns into these cute little crackers. So really fun. Again, the easiest way to start with crackers is figure out what you're going to put for your focus piece. Whether it's a fabulous panel, a fabulous piece of fabric, it doesn't matter. Figure out that size. And then use your math sheet to figure out where to start from here. And again, we're using 2.5 inch strips. Whether that's cutting your own, using your stash, using a beautiful pre-cut strip pack that you got from your local shop. All of that is really fun, really different. So all we're going to do is, of course, now sew our blocks together. So I have mine arranged 7 by 8. And I'm going to put those, and that's going to be roughly about 80 by 100. And then I think I am going to put a border around it. But again, you wouldn't have to. It's still a beautiful queen size quilt. But if you wanted to make it bigger, yes, you can make bird blocks or put a couple extra borders on it. And that's a really simple, fast way to grow your quilt to king size without having to make more blocks or find more focus pieces, because sometimes that's what limits you. Using my Dusk Hoffman panel, I actually have 4 extra, I think, blocks. I think it's only going to take 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it's 8. I'm using only 8 out of my panel that I chose. So super fun. And again, it's just basic piecing. We're just going to start from this side, right sides together. Sew your 1/4 inch seam. And again, I like to chain piece when I'm doing it. So I'll start here and then I'll put this guy and then keep going down, because then your little thread will be there. We've shown that in a couple of our videos before. If you're watching this, you're probably a more, probably not a super beginner, so you probably know the chain piecing, and then you're just gonna keep on going. I'll sew this row together for you, so I can show you that chain piecing in case that's new to you. I'll get this first row sewn up, and that will get you going on the rest of them. Okay, so I thought I'd show you what I meant by the whole chain piecing. So I went ahead and did row 2, right sides together onto row 1, and I stitched my 1/4 inch down just off that block, and then I grabbed next one, row 2, right sides together onto row 1, and I kept sewing. So there's a tiny little piece of thread right here that's still just hanging out, and it's kind of acting like a pin. And I went all the way down and sewed up the entire row, so that now when I open it up, these seams are sewn and they're also connected with a pin. Now, oops, it's also heavier. So now that I've got rows sewn together, and they're kind of pinned with a little chain stitch, a couple of things can happen. So I know if you have watched this for a while, you probably watched Mom put blocks together. What Mom will do is she will then take row 3, right sides together onto row 2, and chain stitch just like before. So all of your blocks just like that. And then you have all of these little chain stitches between each one. So I do the same thing, but in a different order, because I sew in a smaller area. I have to go out to like a living area where I have a big enough spot to lay blocks out. I share my sewing room with a long arm. So my wall space is taken up by my long arm. So I don't have a really cool design wall like I do here at the shop. So how I do it is I still do the chain piecing. I think chain piecing is totally the way to go. I am not a pinner unless I also ultimately have to pin. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain piece in quadrants. So I'm going to set this here, leave that alone, and then I'm going to go to rows 3 and 4. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Right sides together and chain piece all the way down. And I'm going to do that again over here to 5 and 6. And then I'm just going to leave 7 alone for a hot minute. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to sew these together. So I'm going to take this guy and just do right sides together and sew that seam all the way down. So now I have this really cool column that's all sewn together. And it's easier to manage as I go through and going out to my station and bringing it back into my sewing room. So I'm going to sew this column together and sew my 3, 4 together so you can see kind of my steps and how my logic goes. Okay, so you can see, again, row 1 and row 2 are all sewn together. And the next ones did the same thing. Sewed here, chain stitched, showed the next one, kept sewing, the next set, and so on. And then I'll go ahead and sew these seams together. And then I just have all these little quadrants. Again, for me, my design wall at home is not like this. It's not sewing machine here, design wall here. I have to walk out of my room into the living area and pull it from there. So I mean, I could take all of this, but the likelihood of me making sure this block is this exact way when I get to my sewing machine is slim. So I try to always have a habit that this hand, this is where I'm sewing, and then I magically flip it. I don't know. But, so this is how I chain stitch. So Mom, again, sews everything. So everything has these little pretty little chain thread pins in, and that works great too. If you're in a smaller space like me, maybe doing more of a quadrant kind of thing might be easier. So as you go through my last row, my row 7, he's going to be an odd number. I'm just going to sew all 7 of those together and then attach row 7 to 4, 5, or excuse me, 5, 6, and then attach those, and then my quilt will be put together. So we'll just keep going. One thing I do want to point out, you probably have already noticed and have been thinking about it, there are a lot of seams to match. So as we are sewing together a few of these, there was one that I felt like, down here.
It's going to be again 4
Oh,
over.
right here.
Yeah.
So see how these are all going to have to be nestled seams. That is going to be daunting to a few of you. I want you to know, don't worry about it. Go slow. Again, that's why accurate cutting, accurate seam allowance are all very important. And when I mentioned at the beginning that make sure you start and finish these blocks on the same sewing machine, that will make a difference. Even if you're going from a travel FOF machine because you're in vacation to your big beast FOF machine, it's different. I don't know why, but been there, done that. 2 halves of our Jell-O are done and not together. So that's why you want to do that one. The other thing that I would say, if you have gotten this far and now it's no longer fun for you, now you are discouraged, what I want to tell you is this point right here, from 12.5 to your next block, this point right here is the most important point on every single block, whether it's right here, because that's going to make sure that your quilt is square when you are done. If you are working so hard on these to find out that these 4 can't match up, you're going to have kind of an oblong-y quilt. So I would say go slow. If things match up, I feel like mine are matching up really nicely. But if you find that yours are not, worry about these most. I think making sure that your 12-inch squares create this beautiful point right here. And just ignore these guys. At the end of the day, it's all background. It's all going to be quilted beautifully. And no one's going to notice. If someone's nitpicking all your points, this quilt is not for them. Okay? So keep sewing all of those. I'm going to keep sewing. And the next time you see me, I'm going to have this all sewn together. And I'm going to show you what border I have chosen. Okay, so I got the quilt top all pieced together. I wanted to show you that, but I also wanted to show you my borders before I stitched them on. I changed it up just a little bit. The pattern says to make your crackers, make your blocks, do all your jazz, and then finish off with a 4-inch finished border. I still did that, but I wanted to add a 2.5-inch strip border just to kind of frame everything and then put this really cool sagebrush batik on here. If your kit looks similar to mine, this is Hoffman's 1895 in color cappuccino, and this is our Fabric Patch exclusive sagebrush printed batik in sage. So this one you can only get with us, and it looks really good. So I'm really happy how it's turning out. I did not need to add an additional border to make the quilt bigger. It's just going to hang on the wall at the quilt shop until you guys are tired of seeing it. So it doesn't really have a home. So I wanted to show you that. I also wanted to show you what I was talking about earlier about what points really matter when you're piecing. There's a lot of points to be had when we start piecing these together. Again, a little daunting, I know. And now that it's all pieced together, this point right here, where these 4 blocks meet, that point is the most important point. Right here, where these 4 blocks come together, that's important. All the way down, that's going to be the most important corner to make sure it's nestled correctly. It'll help your blocks stay together nicely in a row. You won't have kind of a jig-jaggy seam there. But again, this is not going to be one of these super quick weekend quilts. It's going to take you some time. It's going to take some pressing, some trimming. So it's going to take you a couple days, and that's okay. I know all of us quilters have those go-to quick ones to do when we just want to get something done. And then we also have those projects that are going to take us a little bit more, but they're very rewarding. It is very, very pretty. When you do borders, we did Cindy, Mom, I don't remember why I was going to call her Cindy, but Mom has done a border video talk already. So go ahead and check that video out if you want more detailed information about borders. But the basics of borders is make sure that you have your whole quilt pieced and pressed and pretty, and then you're going to measure the top of your quilt, the bottom of your quilt, and you're going to take the bigger of the two numbers. Usually your difference is about a half an inch at most. Sometimes it's spot on, which is awesome, and sometimes it's not. If it's a huge number, you might want to take a look at some seams, make sure a seam allowance isn't super big or super small. But most likely you're going to have something that's 80 inches up here and maybe 80 3/4 down there. You're going to cut your border piece 80 3/4, and we're going to just stretch a little bit through all of it and piece it on the bottom. And again, when I do pin on my borders, I'm not a girl who enjoys pinning at all, but I do pin my borders. I pin both ends and the center, and then I might put 3 or 4 in the difference, because again, 3/4 of an inch to, stitch in there isn't horrible along 80 inches. And then that gives me a really good way to slowly find where to put it in. The other trick that I learned from doing garment sewing is if you put the larger of the two pieces. So we know the top of our quilt is 80 inches. We know our border is 80 3/4. Pin it still, but then sew with your border, which is the larger one, on your feed dogs. Your feed dogs will work a little harder to move your fabric. If you're using a walking foot or have a FOF with an IDT on it, with a built-in walking foot, it won't make a difference. But if you're sewing with a different machine that doesn't have a walking foot on it, put this on the bottom and it'll make that easing of that 3/4 of an inch really, really easy. And with the extra borders, for my first border, I cut 2.5 inches, so it matches the same width as my blocks here. That was going to be 3/4 of a yard for the first border. And I think that's what it says for, it says 1 yard for a 4-inch border, which probably makes sense, probably works out. And then I am cutting this one at 4.5 inches to finish at 4 inches. And this one is going to be 1.25 yards for your second border. And then you would need, I would say, probably 1 yard for binding. And I'm going to bind in this cappuccino piece. I think I said at the beginning, but I do have kits. So if you really like my color scheme, there are kits available at this very moment. We can always put kits together for you at a later date. So if you're watching this later and you find that kits are not available on our website at fabricpatch.net, we are always available to do some personal shopping. So you can always call us or email us and say, hey, I just watched Brianna doing crackers and I really would love a kit. The only thing that would change for a kit is I feel like the panel is pretty important. So, but the kits are exactly like mine. So all of the same colors. Your textures might change a little bit based on what boutiques are in stock. You also only have 1 3-yard chunk of background. I did a scrappy background because I really like that, but I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. So if you want to do scrappy, go ahead and pull some other backgrounds from your stash. And you can make it scrappy like mine, and then you'll have a little bit for later. And it comes with a panel and of course the pattern. If you don't need the pattern, just let us know and we can make that adjustment for you. If you're here because the panel is what speaks to you, you can also get just the panel. Again, all of that is linked in the description below. Remember, those of you that are Fabric Patch family, you might already have the crackers pattern, but go ahead and get page 5, which is the new kind of math sheet we added to make it easier depending on your focus block. Because we know that changes by panel or how much fabric you might have in your stash. So make sure you get that off or email us again and we'll send it to you. And I think that's everything. So keep watching us. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss anything. And you will see this guy all quilted and beautiful and hanging in his new spots soon on either a Fabric Chat on Wednesday mornings or maybe even one of our box openings. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you make a crackers quilt, whether that's from brand new fabric from a fun shopping trip, or if it's made from your stash, which is always a super good plus because then we'll have more room for more fabric. So thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.
Okay, you guys have made it to the very end through all of my wardrobe changes. The border is now on. But I wanted to let you know, so if you're a hardcore Fabric Patch fan, you will probably be watching Sunday's box opening. I have sneak peeked in my Hoffman box, and look what I found. So a brand new one has come out, and I thought you guys needed to know. So this, of course, this one is gorgeous. I feel like I have to have this one at home too because it's all different. Look at that eagle. Look at that elk. Look at that fish. Look at the fish. So I think it is fantastic, but I wanted you guys to know that if you watch the whole video, you can get this one. I don't have kits cut of this one as of yet, but get your panel, pick 8 half-yard cuts to go with it, and just make sure in your notes when you check out, just say, hey, making crackers, and we'll make sure all 8 coordinate really nice for you. And also, don't forget your 3 yards of background. Again, put your notes in there. We know what you're making. We'll make it right for you. But, so make sure you get one of these panels, pick up this panel or the kit, get your crackers pattern, because these are going to go super fast once you see it on Sunday box opening. So thanks for watching. Thank you for watching to the end, and I hope you enjoyed your little surprise.